Hey everybody, it's Gary Wilson reporting from Chicago. Today we're talking with Kevin Brubaker, Deputy Director of the Environmental Law and Policy Center. The Law Center is a nonprofit that does legal advocacy work on a host of environmental issues, including the Great Lakes. As part of its Great Lakes advocacy, it recently filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency over the agency's alleged failure to protect Lake Erie. Kevin Brubaker, welcome to Great Lakes Now.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get to Lake Erie, what is the Law Center's overall involvement with the Great Lakes? How does it fit into your broader policy and legal strategy?
Well, the Environmental Law and Policy Center is a Midwest-based organization. The Great Lakes are home to us as well as to millions of other people. So we treat a threat to these Great Lakes as a threat to our front yard. Our overall philosophy in approaching all environmental issues is how can we bring together the goals of environmental protection and jobs and economic development at the same time? In the Great Lakes, this is particularly true when you think about, 30 million of us depend on the Great Lakes for drinking water. We depend on it for shipping, for fishing, for the tourism industries. It's the key ingredient in some of the best beers manufactured in the world. So clean Great Lakes are important for our health, but also critical to our economy.
And you got the beer in there. That's very important these days.
Absolutely.
Your lawsuit, which you filed recently, briefly talk about the Lake Erie lawsuit. What does the Policy Center want to accomplish with that suit?
The key goal of this lawsuit is to clean up Lake Erie. We can't clean up Lake Erie, though, until there is a broad acknowledgement on what the problem is. Scientists tell us that the entire western half of Lake Erie is seriously polluted. The state of Michigan agrees. The state of Ohio, on the other hand, says, no, it's just along the shoreline that it's a problem. And the US EPA has gone along with that decision. That's wrong. It's against the best science is telling us otherwise. So our lawsuit is to force the EPA to do its job, to acknowledge what the problem is. Once we have agreement on the problem, let's work together on solutions.
A U.S. and Canadian Advisory Commission, the International Joint Commission, recently declared the overall health of the Great Lakes essentially average health, with the exception of Lake Erie. It said Lake Erie is in, and I'm quoting here, poor and deteriorating condition. How do we ever get a handle on Lake Erie's problems? Will we as a region ever have the political will to make the hard decisions necessary to bring Lake Erie back to health?
I think so. The fundamental problem in Lake Erie is agricultural runoff. Farmers putting fertilizers on the soil that's washing off into Lake Erie, feeding toxic algae that give off poisons so that we can't drink the water. That doesn't do the farmers any good. They'd rather have the fertilizers in the crops to make money. So again, once the problem's acknowledged, we can get scientists, Farm Bureau, Soil and Water Conservation Services, state governments all working together to keep the fertilizer in the crops instead of in our drinking water.
Moving on to Congress and the President and the budget, especially for the Great Lakes, it appears that Congress is on the cusp of approving $300 million for the Great Lakes in 2018 in an apparent rebuke to the Trump administration's budget request for zero funding. At the same time, Congress and the administration are about to roll back the Clean Water Rule, which would actually prevent pollution. There's been regional outrage about the proposed budget cuts, but little has been said about the rollback of the Clean Water Rule, which was 2 years in the making. Are we as a region too focused on the money here?
Look, both are very important. Of course we need to clean up the Great Lakes. Citizens were outraged when they heard that the Trump administration wanted to stop the cleanup. They wrote to their members of Congress, and Congress looks like they're responding by restoring that money. It's not a done deal yet. People need to stay involved, keep letting their elected officials know they care about the Great Lakes. It's also true, though, we should be preventing the pollution in the first place, and that's where the Clean Water Rule comes in. The further upstream we can control pollution, the more effectively we can protect the Great Lakes. That's essentially what the Clean Water Rule is about, is giving the federal government, maintaining the federal government's authority over upstream creeks and wetlands that ultimately pollute the Great Lakes and other bodies of water. Public comment on that closes this Wednesday, so it's very important for citizens to go to elpc.org, sign on to letters telling the US EPA that we want our water clean.
Previously in your career, you worked, I believe, for the governor of Rhode Island. How hard is it, or is it hard for the average citizen to make a connection with a senior elected official, not specifically the governor of Rhode Island, but members of Congress, and get them to pay attention to something like the Clean Water Rule?
I think the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding debate really demonstrates the answer to that question. When citizens stood up and said, we care about the Great Lakes, elected officials responded. Republican governors throughout the Great Lakes wrote to the Trump administration saying, keep the money in the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Elected officials are very sensitive to public opinion. The public cares about the Great Lakes. The public is articulating that concern, and Congress is responding. We need to use that same tool in a host of other battles to protect the Great Lakes.
Kevin, President Trump has been in office for 6 months, and he's, as we all know, he's taken the country, the United States, out of the Paris Climate Accords, is in the process of downsizing the US EPA, at least trying to, and he's clearly had rollback of environmental regulations in his sights, and he campaigned on these issues. How will the Environmental Law and Policy Center deal with these threats?
The Environmental Law and Policy Center, with our colleagues around the region, is fighting back against Donald Trump's war on the Great Lakes. We're fighting with lawsuits like the Lake Erie lawsuit we're talking about this morning. We're fighting by mobilizing citizens to protect the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, the National Marine Sanctuary in Thunder Bay, the Clean Water Rule, and other issues. The law is on our side. Public opinion is on our side. We're going to win.
What's your advice to the average citizen who may care about the Great Lakes, clearly cares about, clean drinking water, but healthcare is in the news every day? Everybody's got obligations, and they don't have time to focus on the issues as you may have and others, but they do care about these issues. What's your advice to them to cope with all this?
Don't give up hope. Stay involved. We don't need every citizen to become an expert in Great Lakes water quality. We need citizens to come to our website, elpc.org, where we can explain these issues in simple terms and explain what people can do to help solve the problems, how to contact members of Congress, how to contact the US EPA over the Clean Water Rule.
Kevin Brubaker, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For Great Lakes Now, I'm Gary Wilson.